And we're back with still knitting the 16th chapter of the second book of A Tale of Two Cities. We have got the Defarges have just returned home from having taken the road builder to the palace of Versailles and seeing how he would react to seeing the king and queen, and they've been having a little conversation among themselves. Next noontide saw the admirable woman in her usual place in the wine shop knitting away. Assiduously a rose lay before her, and if she now and then glanced at the flower, it was with no infraction of her usual preoccupied air. There were a few customers, drinking or not drinking, standing or seated, sprinkled about. The day was very hot, and heaps of flies, who were extending their inquisitive and adventurous perquisitions into the glutinous little glasses near Madame fell dead at the bottom. Their decease made no impression on the other flies out promenading, who looked at them in the coolest manner, as if they themselves were elephants or something as far removed, until they met the same fate. Curious to consider how heedless flies are, perhaps they thought as much at court that sunny summer day. The figure entering at the door threw a shadow on Madame Defarge, which she felt to be a new one. She laid down her knitting and began to pin her rose to her headdress before she looked at the figure. It was curious. The moment Madame Defarge took up the rose, the customers ceased talking and began gradually to drop out of the wine shop. "Good day, madame," said the newcomer. "Good day, monsieur." She said it aloud, but added to herself, as she resumed her knitting, "Ha! Good day, age about 40, height about 5 feet 9, black hair, generally rather handsome visage, complexion dark, eyes dark, thin, long, and sallow face, aquiline nose, but not straight, having a peculiar inclination toward the left cheek, which impairs a sinister expression. Good day, one and all. Have the goodness to give me a little glass of old cognac, and a mouthful of cool fresh water, madame." Madame complied with a polite air. "Marvelous cognac, this, madame." It was the first time it had ever been so complimented, and Madame Defarge knew enough of its antecedents to know better. She said, however, that the cognac was flattered, and took up her knitting. The visitor watched her fingers for a few moments, and took the opportunity of observing the place in general. "You knit with great skill, madame." "I am accustomed to it. A pretty pattern, too." "You think so?" said Madame, looking at him with a smile. "Decidedly. May I ask what it is for?" "Pastime," said Madame, still looking at him with a smile, while her fingers moved nimbly. "Not for use. That depends. I may find a use for it one day. If I do, well," said Madame, drawing a breath, and nodding her head with a stern kind of coquetry, "I'll use it." It was remarkable, but the taste of Saint Antoine seemed to be decidedly opposed to a rose on the headdress of Madame Defarge. Two men had entered separately, and had been about to order drink, when, catching sight of that novelty, they faltered, made a pretense of looking about as if for some friend who was not there, and went away. Nor, of those who had been there when this visitor entered, was there one left. They had all dropped off. The spy had kept his eyes open, but had been able to detect no sign. They had lounged away in poverty-stricken purposelessness, accidental manner, quite natural and unimpeachable. "John," thought Madame, checking off her work as her fingers knitted and her eyes looked at the stranger, "stay long enough, and I shall knit Barsad before you go." "You have a husband, madame?" "I have." "Children?" "No children." "Business seems bad?" "Business is very bad. The people are so poor." "Ah, the unfortunate miserable people. So oppressed, too, as you say." "As you say," Madame retorted, correcting him, and deftly knitting an extra something into his name that boded him no good. "Pardon me. Certain it was I who said so, but you naturally think so, of course." "I think," returned Madame, in a high voice, "I and my husband have enough to do to keep this wine-shop open without thinking. All we think here is how to live. That is the subject we think of, and it gives us from morning to night enough to think about without embarrassing our heads concerning others. I think for others? No, no. The spy, who was there to pick up any crumbs he could find or make, did not allow his baffled stare to express itself in his sinister face, but stood with an air of gossiping gallantry, leaning his elbow on Madame Defarge's little counter and occasionally sipping his cognac. A bad business this, madame, of Gaspard's execution. Ah, the poor Gaspard! With a sigh of great compassion. My faith, returned Madame coolly and lightly, if people use knives for such purposes, they have to pay for it. He knew beforehand what price his luxury was. He has paid the price. I believe, said the spy, dropping his soft voice to a tone that invited confidence and expressing an injured revolutionary susceptibility in every muscle of his wicked face, I believe there is much compassion and anger in this neighborhood touching the poor fellow between ourselves. Is there? Asked Madame vacantly. Is there not? Here is my husband, said Madame Defarge. As the keeper of the wine-shop entered at the door, the spy saluted him by touching his hat, and saying with an engaging smile, Good day, Jacques. Defarge stopped short and stared at him. Good day, Jacques, the spy repeated, with not quite so much confidence, or quite so easy a smile under the stare. You deceive yourself, monsieur, returned the keeper of the wine-shop. You mistake me for another. That is not my name. I am Ernest Defarge. It is all the same, said the spy airily, but discomfited too. Good day. Good day, answered Defarge dryly. I was saying to Madame, with whom I had the pleasure of chatting when you entered, that they tell me there is, and no wonder, much sympathy and anger in Saint Antoine touching the unhappy fate of poor Gaspard. No one has told me so, said Defarge, shaking his head. I know nothing of it. Having said it, he passed behind the little counter and stood with his hand on the back of his wife's chair, looking over the barrier at the person to whom they were both opposed, and whom neither of them would have shot with the greatest satisfaction. The spy, well used to his business, did not change his unconscious attitude, but drained his little glass of cognac, took a sip of fresh water, and asked for another glass of cognac. Madame Defarge poured it out for him, took to her knitting again, and hummed a little song over it. You seem to know this quarter well, that is to say, better than I do, observed Defarge. Not at all, but I hope to know it better. I am so profoundly interested in its miserable inhabitants. Ha! muttered Defarge. The pleasure of conversing with you, Monsieur Defarge, recalls to me, pursued the spy, that I have the honor of cherishing some interesting associations with your name. Indeed, said Defarge with much indifference. Yes, indeed. When Dr. Manette was released, you, his old domestic, had the charge of him, I know. He was delivered to you. You see, I am informed of the circumstances. Such is the fact, certainly, said Defarge. He had had it conveyed to him in an accidental touch of his wife's elbow, as she knitted and warbled, that he would do best to answer, but always with brevity. It was to you, said the spy, that his daughter came, and it was from your care that his daughter took him, accompanied by a neat brown monsieur, how is he called, in a little wig, Lorry of the Bank of Tellson and Company over in England? Such is the fact, repeated Defarge. Very interesting remembrances, said the spy. I have known Dr. Manette and his daughter in England. Yes, said Defarge. You don't hear much about them now, said the spy. No, said Defarge. In effect, Madame stuck in, looking up from her work at her little song, we never hear about them. We receive the news of their safe arrival and perhaps another letter, or perhaps two, but since then they have gradually taken their road in life, we ours, and we have held no correspondence. Perfectly so, madame, replied the spy. She is going to be married. Going? Echoed Madame. She was pretty enough to have been married long ago. You English are cold, it seems to me. Oh, you know I am English. I perceive your tongue is, returned Madame. And what the tongue is, I suppose the man is. He did not take the identification as a compliment, but he made the best of it, and turned it off with a laugh, after sipping his cognac to the To the end he added, "Yes, Miss Manette is going to be married, but not to an Englishman, to one who, like herself, is French by birth. And speaking of Gaspard, ah, poor Gaspard!"